2025 has gotten off to what might generously be described as an uncertain start. The one thing people want right now is clarity, or at least some idea of what we might expect to see in supply chains this year. One of the most consistent issues that has been facing sourcing directors and supply chain managers has been logistics. After years of unprecedented disruptions, logistics might be one of the few blessings that we see in an increasingly chaotic landscape. I'm Jane Singer, and welcome back to A Seat at the Table. To get an insider's view of what we might expect to see this year, I sat down with Zvi Schreiber, founder and CEO of Freightos, the leading digital booking platform for ocean and air cargo. In addition to founding Freightos, Zvi is a recognized log tech leader. He was previously CEO of Light Tech, which was acquired by GE, and of Unicom, which was acquired by IBM. He holds a PhD in computer science and is author of Fizz, The History of Physics in a Novel, and Money Going Out of Style, which explores money and economics. In this episode, Zvi will be sharing insights on what the impact on air cargo might be of the removal of the de minimis exemption. He'll also be talking about what could happen to ocean rates if carriers are able to return to the Suez Canal. And he'll be sharing possible scenarios for both ocean and air freight capacity in 2025. Now let's sit down with Zvi and find out what could be happening this year in global logistics. I want to thank you for taking the time to join me today. I think that there's been so much chaos going on around the tariffs and then on one day, off the next. And what are you seeing around this? I know particularly it's impacting air cargo, but certainly there may be some impact on freight as well, ocean freight.
Oh, yeah, it's absolutely impacting both. There's a specific impact on the e-commerce, which I don't know how many of your listeners are in that business, but with the direct to consumer e-commerce like Shein, which is mostly air cargo, they have a particular impact. But of course, the tariffs apply to air and ocean and road yeah, equally. And so it's impacting everyone and yeah, creating chaos. So maybe I should explain. I'm CEO of Freightos, and we're a shipping marketplace. So we're very much the forefront of this. We also own a customs broker, a digital customs broker in the US and Canada called Clearit. So between the shipping and the customs brokerage, all of our customers, like your listeners, are in a little bit of a panic because we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. So there was the suddenly tariffs on Mexico and Canada, and a cancellation of the de minimis, which I can explain in a minute what that is if it's not clear. And then, of course, that's been postponed for 30 days. So now it's hanging over us as a threat in about 20 days from now. And then China, suddenly another round of tariffs, 10% on all Chinese goods. And then the de minimis exemption for China was cancelled, and then it was reinstated, I think 2 or 3 days later. We don't know if that's going to be cancelled, but that has a big impact on e-commerce players. Doesn't impact people who are bringing in a full container, which is probably worth more than $800 anyway. But anyone who's doing sort of direct to consumer e-commerce, bringing in individual packages, the de minimis is a huge, usually by air, but doesn't have to be. The de minimis has a huge impact on that, and that was cancelled and reinstated. So yes, we're in a state of flux. And of course, we're doing our best as a marketplace to give our customers options, shipping options and customs brokerage options to deal with it. But it's a tough time. And if the tariffs stick, then they're substantial, and that could cause people to some products might not be economical to bring in anymore, or people may have to think about manufacturing in other locations. But yeah, very, very hard for your listeners and our customers to make any plans when things are changing so quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things that struck me is that when you get rid of the de minimis in particular, because you're talking about a very high volume of packages, and they've abruptly canceled that, how can customs handle that now? I mean, usually there's a scaling up to be able to staff up and have everything you need in place to clear customs on things that didn't have to clear before. What do you see happening around that?
Well, Yeah, customs can't deal with it, which is why, at least in the case of China, where the big volumes are, I think about 3 million packages a day, right? Um, that's why the Trump administration cancelled, brought back the de minimis. You'd have thought, by the way, they might have had a chat with the customs authorities before they, before they cancelled the de minimis in the first place. That would have been a sensible thing to do, but apparently not. Apparently, they cancelled it first and then realized that that's not practical and then uncancelled it for now. But yes, I mean, when you bring something in under the de minimis exemption, and by the way, most countries have de minimis, but in the US, it's become very generous over the years. $800 is a very generous de minimis. Here it's $70. I don't know how much it is in Hong Kong. Um, when you cancel, then A, duties apply, and with China, you've got the long-term duties plus the Trump duties from the first Trump administration, which haven't been cancelled. I think they're called TR 301, and plus the extra 10%. So it could be vaguely, it depends very much on the commodity, but vaguely it could easily add up to 20 to 40%, depending on the product. So it's a substantial duty. But of course, also there's a lot more paperwork when you're bringing in something not under the de minimis. So you need to worry about all the partner government agencies. So different, depending on what you're bringing in, it may need, safety, the Environmental Protection Agency or the Federal Drug Administration or the Food and Drug Administration, I should say. The other agencies will have their say as well. So there's a bunch of paperwork. And the guys who are bringing in many commodities, Temu and in particular AliExpress, Shein, they don't even have that paperwork ready because they were bringing in everything under the exemption. So now, A, they've got to pay the duties. B, they've got to pay a customs broker to deal with all of that. C, they've got to get all the information, all the certificates of origin and various paperwork that various government agencies. So the whole thing becomes a lot more complex. And certainly the CBP isn't set up to deal with that and for another 3 million packages a day, and the importers aren't set up, to deal with all of that. So there's a lot of preparation, which people are trying to scramble to get ready, both on the importers, and the vendors who are supplying those importers, and the CBP as well. So yeah, it's a big change which affects millions of packages every day, about 1 billion packages a year, I think. So absolutely.
I mean, how much of that, and I know it's very hard to predict. I mean, I'm just simply hypothesizing here with you. How much of that is likely to lead towards things being, transshipped via other countries if that de minimis from China, becomes just disappears if it's completely halted, not simply the limit as it has been suggested among some areas that they simply lower the level of the value.
Yeah, I mean, if they lower it to, $100, then probably many of the packages can still, I'm sure many of the packages that Temu and Shein are very cheap, so I'm sure many of their packages are below $100. But if they reduce it altogether, then yeah, transshipment doesn't really help. I mean, duties apply by the country of origin. So A, they're canceling, they may be canceling the exemptions for Canada and Mexico as well, which are the obvious sort of transshipment places for the United States. But B, and also Mexico have canceled the exemption they had. So even if so you can't anymore, Mexico don't allow you anymore to just bring it into Mexico and then repackage it. So they've closed that loophole. But in any event, duties apply. So even if the de minimis applies and remains in Mexico, which we'll see in 20 days or whenever it is, that wouldn't help. It would still duties would still apply if the country of origin is China, for example. And yeah, we'll see. But basically, no. Basically, transshipment doesn't necessarily help you. Duties apply by the country of origin, not by the border it crosses from, in most
Right,
cases.
right, right. So if they did apply, or if they did remove de minimis completely, make it so that essentially they close that loophole very abruptly, then you would have a tremendous overcapacity. Then I would imagine in air cargo, since it's been serving a huge volume specifically coming in from China.
Yeah, potentially. I mean, it's well. Certainly, it's true that a big part of air cargo, between China and the US, probably order of magnitude half of that air cargo is taken up by e-commerce. Now, if the de minimis loophole, loophole's a bad word. I mean, it's an exemption. It's not a loophole. Congress did this explicitly. Is it a loophole? I mean, it's true Congress didn't anticipate that a billion packages would come in that way. So it's been used a lot more than Congress, anticipated. But it was an explicit exemption, not a loophole. So let's call it a exemption. So if that exemption is closed now, that doesn't mean that all the volumes of Temu and Shein and AliExpress go away. They can still do all of that, and other niche players who are doing that. They can still do that. They just have to pay duties and go through the paperwork and duties. That can be done. I mean, like I said, we have a company called Clearit who do customs brokerage in a pretty efficient way, and so that can still be done. Now it will cost, the goods will end up costing 20, 30, 40% more. But I don't know if you've ever looked at some of these companies. Sometimes the China price is very cheap, and you add 30, 40%, it may still be economical in some cases. So the volumes will go down for sure, but they won't necessarily disappear because that kind of product can still be attractive even with the duties and even with the paperwork. So, but somehow the volumes have got to go down. I mean, that's enough duties that some of the products, people are going to buy less of some of those products. So it will affect air cargo volumes, maybe in a positive way. I mean, it's been very hard to find capacity in China-US air cargo these last couple of years. And I think for many of our customers, that will be a very welcome thing if there's a little bit less capacity being taken up by Temu and Shein and AliExpress and those guys. That will bring down rates and make more capacity available for other air cargo shippers. So there's certainly a positive side to that. And yes, we do anticipate a significant impact on capacity and rates of air cargo in China, US.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, what do you think? Certainly, I mean, when you look at it from a practical point of view, assuming that they do go forward with removing this exemption, and certainly there's been talk not just in the US, but also in the EU as well. Um,
Yep.
so, a lot of this has been very US focused, certainly because these tariffs coming forward so quickly and potentially removing de minimis. There's just been a lot happening around that. But we can't ignore that Europe is also equally eager to tackle the de minimis exemption on their side. What do you see if you look overall, because you see the picture from air cargo, from ocean freight, what do you see as the biggest impact on that from a shipper's point of view?
Well, it depends what happens, of course. I mean, we don't know what tariffs will be imposed on Europe and when and what retaliate. We assume there'll be a retaliation if that happens. So none of that is known. How much it will be and when it will be. Um, but these tariffs, so it depends on the level. I mean, in the first Trump administration, the tariffs that he imposed had a pretty minor impact on world trade, actually. In fact, at the end of the first Trump administration, the trade deficit with China was no lower than it was at the beginning. So those tariffs didn't have their stated aim. They didn't rebalance trade between America and China. And um, so it depends very much how much tariffs and the details. But in general, if there are more tariffs and they succeed in reducing trade, then the price of shipping is very sensitive to volumes, very sensitive. So if you reduce trade between China and the US by 10% or between China and Europe by 10%, that will have a big impact on ocean rates and on air rates. And we see that. We see in COVID when retail when people purchase 10 or 20% more goods, the shipping rates went up by 1,000%. So the rates are very, very sensitive. Or when the Suez Canal was closed, then shipping rates went up by about 200% and still are still higher because the Suez Canal is still effectively closed. And then we've got the threat of Trump taking over the Panama Canal. So who knows what that does to shipping rates as well, right? There's a lot of uncertainty. But yeah, in general, um, when there are tariffs, they will make some goods less attractive. They will reduce some trade, and they will reduce shipping rates significantly, which might actually be welcome for international shippers.
Yeah, I think shippers would certainly welcome reduced rates because I think people are really struggling with the fact that rates really never got anywhere near 2019 rates. They've come down, they went up again last year, they're inching down again, but still, if you look historically, right, and you know better than I what they've been, it's still a fair bit higher than what we'd seen. Um, when you
Yeah. By the way, sorry, let me just double click on that for a second. I mean, ocean rates, yeah, and we publish two leading indicators. The FBX, the Freightos Baltic Index, is the index we publish, which is a leading index for ocean rates, and FAX, the Freightos Air Index, is a leading indicator for air rates. Um, once, yeah, thank you. And so one slight correction: ocean rates last year did get back to below 2019 levels. Air rates didn't. Air rates have never got back to pre-COVID levels. Um, and now, China US is up at sort of $5, $6 a kilo, whereas we'd expect them outside of peak season, they're normally about $3 a kilo. So in air, it's absolutely true. But ocean rates last year, or in 2013 rather, absolutely did get back to lower than pre-COVID rates. We were seeing a 40-foot container, our FBX 01 tracks a 40-foot container from China to US West Coast, and we were seeing that at around $1,000, which is very low, and lower than but we rarely saw that pre-COVID. But then of course, yeah, the Suez Canal is what's been propping that up. And now there's a tentative sort of ceasefire happening, and we could see the Suez Canal reopening, and we'll see ocean rates crash if that happens. But yeah, so they did at least briefly get back in 2013 to lower than pre-COVID, and then they got higher again for a whole new reason, which is the crisis in the Red Sea.
Right. So potentially, if the Suez reopens and if shipping dramatically drops off from China, we could see a tremendous drop again, theoretically, hypothetically, in ocean rates and also air cargo.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, ocean rates we believe will drop very dramatically if the Suez Canal reopens. Because in addition to that, there's absent that diversion, if there wasn't all these ships, taken up from going around Africa, then there's actually overcapacity because during COVID, the shipping lines bought a lot of ships, and some of those are already on the water, some more are being delivered. So yes, absent the Red Sea crisis, we will see ocean rates crash dramatically, like we did in 2013, almost certainly. And of course, yes, anything which is happening with tariffs dampening world trade will be bad for importers, but will at least on the positive side will bring down rates in air and ocean. And like we said, in air is particularly sensitive. China US air is particularly sensitive to the de minimis and the e-commerce, which is taking up a lot of that capacity.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, what we see in the apparel sector is that for several years, there's been a lot of what they call de-risking, which is shifting
Yeah.
production out of China, but not only out of China. I mean, it started with trying to reduce the very heavy reliance on China and moving into other Southeast Asian countries and now moving into all over the world. So we see people trying to reduce that dependency, which could be helpful if the U.S. specifically focuses its tariff efforts on China. But then, it's really hard to know whether other countries will come in the crosshairs and how, that's going to impact. I don't know because you probably don't follow specifically apparel, but I mean, do you see anything on your side? Um, it may be hard to say because you cover so many industries, right? It's not industry specific, and some of them may
Yeah,
be
but
still heavily China dependent.
yeah, look, apparel is a big industry for us as well. You're right, we're industry agnostic, but apparel is a big one, and we work with some really big apparel manufacturers like Inditex, the Zara brand, or a customer of ours. So we do see that. Yes, I think you're right. I think everyone's looking China plus one at least, so at least have one other source, whether it's Bangladesh or Vietnam or some other Southeast Asia. But now, yes, we don't know if tomorrow morning there'll be tariffs in Southeast Asia or on other countries. So I think, as always, COVID taught us that having options is valuable, and now Trump's teaching us all over again. And that's kind of our remit as, as a marketplace, Freightos is to A, provide the data on Freightos Terminal of what's happening with the rates and the transit times, etc., and B, provide shipping options, air and ocean options, so that people have and the play between air and ocean is also important. If suddenly ocean gets delayed because of the Suez Canal or because you need to try a new supplier and you don't have time, then at least having the air options is important. So that's sort of yeah, we can't tell our customers what will happen in the future, but we can at least provide options, but at least provide a website where you can find different shipping options and also the data very quickly. And that's the one bit that we can do to help.
Yeah, well, that's very, very important. And I think that people are trying to figure that in, especially as people are trying to build these sort of ecosystems involving all different aspects of their supply chain, tying in shipping as well as the factory, and a lot of it connecting through AI and other technology, to be able to get that data up to date that you are providing through your various dashboards on Freightos is absolutely critical. It can't be denied the vital role that that plays. I mean, I'm talking to buying offices all the time as part of my work, as well as to factories. And it does play an increasingly critical role in terms of the cost, but also in terms of speed and all the other factors that people are trying to juggle. So to be able to get that data that you provide is absolutely vital.
Yeah, maybe one other thing related to that, which I think is quite interesting, is the role of the sort of the annual tenders. I don't know if I'm interested. Are most of the fashion brands that you're talking to, are most of them big, or a lot of them sort of niche SMB players, or both? I'm kind of curious.
Well, that's a very interesting question, and it's something that we're actually looking at right now within what we're doing at Inside Fashion and current situation in sourcing. Um, I think that the market's been dominated by huge players, right? Particularly offshoring, because Asia's always been able to do volume at a price. But now we're seeing a big shift in the market that's been happening over time, and that is that you have a lot of what we call indie brands, right? Independent brands that have come up. It's been easier. Obviously, technology has really been a leveler. So it's made it possible for a lot of smaller brands to get a foot in the door, and some of them have grown. I mean, are they massive publicly traded companies? No, but they're not necessarily the kind of thing that you used to have, which is, somebody just working in a very small shop. Some of them are, quite sizable, quite and becoming interesting to some of the factories in this part of the world who are looking to get more orders and who are now able to take orders as low as like 500 pieces, for example, even in Bangladesh, which has typically been big volume. So you're right. That's a change in the landscape, so to speak.
Yeah, so I think that's really interesting, and we see that as well. We're sort of servicing shippers in fashion and other industries, all the way from tiny, mom and pop shops who bring in a couple of cubic meters, less than container load even, and try that, or air cargo, right the way up to Inditex, who's doing tens of thousands of containers. Um, and so it's great to look at all the whole spectrum. At the big end, the common practice has still been to do a tender and try to lock in ocean prices and air prices for a quarter or a year. And we acquired recently a platform called Shipstar out of Luxembourg, who just help with that process of the big companies of negotiating those big tenders, because that's a hell of a process. People spend weeks negotiating their tenders. I'm going to be in 3 weeks at the TPM conference, where there'll be a lot of fashion brands as well in Long Beach, which is sort of the biggest, the Trans-Pacific shipping conference of the year. Uh, but also we're seeing people trying to, and just one other point, they're trying to get away from the fixed price tender and move to index linking tenders. That's an interesting trend that we're seeing, saying it's just too hard to lock in a price for the year, and no, people don't respect it anyway when the market changes. So a new trend that we're seeing is actually doing tenders where the price is not fixed for the year, but it's based on an index such as our FBX, and it updates automatically. So that's an interesting trend we've seen with the bigger shippers.
Yeah, could you take a minute and just explain how that works? Because some of the people listening to this may or may not understand that.
Yeah, it's very common in other industries. It hasn't been so common in container shipping. It's very common in bulk shipping. But the idea is, what you're used to is you try to, talk to the ship liner or to the NVOCC, the freight forwarder, and lock in, say, I'm going to bring in 10,000 containers next year if you're on the big side, and I want to lock in a price of $3,000 for whatever Shanghai to Long Beach, and you spend weeks trying to negotiate those prices. But then what happens is if the rates go up to $5,000 because of the Red Sea crisis, then the steamship line says, okay, well, I can't really respect that, so I'm going to add a surcharge, pick a Red Sea surcharge, or I respect it, but I'm not going to prioritize your cargo. I'm going to prioritize the spot shipments where I can make $5,000. And if the rate drops to $1,000 because suddenly the Red Sea crisis is over, and that can happen, then the shipper, the fashion company, for example, tries to say, well, I've got a contract at $3,000. I'm not going to use it. I'm just going to buy on the spot market. So these companies spend a long time trying to negotiate the fixed price tenders, but then they don't always respect them. So the alternative, which is becoming more popular, is saying, you know what? I'm not going to try to fix a price because we can't predict the market, but I'm going to say, let's take the FBX01 index. And because I'm a big shipper, and I'm committing to volume, I want a 10% discount. And I'm going to pay you the FBX index minus 10%. And then it will float. So the price will get updated each quarter automatically. And it can run for 3 years because the price updates automatically. And so instead of trying to fix a price each year and then it doesn't get respected, we say, okay, our price will get updated automatically every quarter based on the market index. And this is very common in other industries. If you buy, fuel or even bulk shipping or coal or whatever it is, or pork bellies, they have these markets. But in our industry, it's just starting where people say, you know what, instead of trying to negotiate a price each year and then we don't respect it, we'll have an automatic mechanism for the price to update each quarter. So that's an important trend we're seeing with the bigger shippers right now.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. And you're right. It's a very relevant way of doing things because people are used to that in terms of how people price commodities and how people budget. It's a new way of looking at things, I suppose, for industries like ours, where people have negotiated contracts. But they'll need to be able to adapt to that. And as you're pointing out, ultimately, it would make more sense from their costing point of view. And that's where something like what you're offering at Freightos probably is a reference point that they need in order to be able to estimate or guesstimate where this may be going. So are you offering as part of Freightos a way for people, are you offering hedging tools?
Well, we don't. Yes, I mean we don't ourselves offer hedging tools. We offer tools for linking to the index. We've got the Freightos terminal where you can track the index and create rules and create a ceiling and a floor, and then there is hedging available. Exactly, we don't offer that ourselves because you need to be a financial services company to be licensed to do that. But there are future contracts on our FBX index traded both in the CME, the Chicago Mercantile Exchange, and also in so we provide the tools to have the data and negotiate a contract which updates automatically and save that whole headache of trying to fix a price and then not respecting it. So we provide tools for that. And then there are other people who provide the tools to hedge and say, protect yourself in case the price goes up, or for the steamship line to protect themselves in case the price goes down.
Yeah, I think that's really, really so important and so valuable. Now, if there's one final thing that you would want to share with people who are looking at the freight sector, whether it be air freight or ocean freight, and I know it's difficult, right? And that's sort of a tough question with so many moving parts at the moment. But what would you know what I mean, in a sentence or two, say that you would advise people?
I think, this is going to be obvious, but agility is key. The world is very uncertain. We have a trade war. We have actual wars which are impacting trade. We have increasingly unpredictable weather, which affects trade. So the world is very uncertain. So keep optionality. Don't try to lock in fixed contracts with fixed price for a long time. Make sure your contracts update themselves. Make sure you have option. Make sure you can play between ocean and air. And that's certainly our job at Freightos, is to provide digital tools like we have in other industries, where you can see your options in real time.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And you're right. Agility is really, it's the way forward for everybody on all aspects of the supply chain right now. Well, Zvi, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me about this. I think you've shared so many important insights. I would certainly encourage anybody listening to this to take a look at what Freightos has to offer. I'm going to put a link in the show notes if you're watching this as a video or a podcast, and certainly you'll be able to find it as part of an article right up on our website. So please take a look and check out Freightos. The service is excellent. I've had a look at it myself, even though I'm not a shipper, but I can certainly appreciate the technology and what they're doing. So thank you again.
Thanks, Jane. It was a fun chat.
Thanks for joining us today. It is always a pleasure to have you as part of this show. Is there anyone you'd like to see me interview on this show or any topics you'd like to see me cover? If so, please either send me an email or leave a comment if you're watching this as a video. You'll find the links for doing so in the description or in the show notes for this episode. Again, thanks for being here and for being part of A Seat at the Table. I'm Jane Singer, and I will see you in the next episode.